Since the launch of Crimson Lights, Sharon Newman's life had become more consistent and had reached a solid pace. In Genoa City, the coffee shop had become into a haven for her and for a great number of other people as well. The atmosphere was comforting and reminiscent of home thanks to the sound of customers conversing, the sound of mugs being clinked, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. In spite of the fact that she had been through so many years of ups and downs, including sad losses and family strife, Sharon cherished these moments of tranquility. One evening, Sharon was closing up, wiping off tables and ready for another day when she observed a shadowy figure waiting outside the door. At first, she disregarded it, supposing that it was a customer who had arrived late. However, as she went closer to the entrance, the figure remained stationary, and the street light created a silhouette that was recognizable across the window. The rhythm of Sharon's heart skipped a pulse. An aspect of the figure seemed to be both exhilarating and disturbing at the same time. As she opened the door with caution, her voice remained calm, but was filled with a sense of curiosity. "It's true that we're closed, but would you like me to assist you with something?" The figure moved forward, and Sharon's breath caught as she recognized the person who had come to visit. When the figure spoke to Sharon, their voice carried a sense of warmth and familiarity that she hadn't experienced in many years. "Sharon, it's been a long time," they remarked. Dylan McAvoy, her ex-husband, who had vanished from her life without a trace several years ago, was noticed standing in the doorway with a worried smile on his face. Sharon's thoughts raced as memories came flooding back to her, including times of love and laughter, as well as the agony of their unexpected separation. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. "Dylan, are you sure that it is you?" she inquired with a voice that was scarcely audible above a whisper. In response to the look that he saw in her eyes, Dylan offered a slight nod, and his countenance became more gentle. "You're right, Sharon. This is me. I'm again." Sharon let him in by opening the door wider and indicating that he should come in. She was overcome with a whole host of questions and feelings that she hadn't experienced in years. Sharon, who was attempting to come to terms with the gravity of the situation, poured him a cup of coffee as they sank into a seat in the corner of the room. She finally asked, her voice shaking, What brings you back?" in a questioning tone. A deep breath was taken by Dylan, who appeared to be feeling the weight of his voyage on his face. "I needed to pay you a visit. Sharon, it has been a long journey, and there is a great deal that I am unable to share with you. Nevertheless, I was aware that I needed to return and put everything in order." Sharon experienced a flood of feelings, including rage, love, and an overpowering sense of curiosity. In a number of ways, she had moved on, but the wound that Dylan had left behind had never completely healed. Now when he was sitting opposite her, he appeared to be the same, but there was something different about him, a weariness that she was unable to deny. Over the course of the following hour, Dylan disclosed the reason for his absence, elaborating in a hazy manner that he had been engaged in hazardous labor, which had compelled him to depart Genoa City without prior notice. Sharon could feel the weight of secrets in his comments, things that he felt unwilling to disclose, but he was unable to go into details due to his inability to do so. The slightest crack in her voice could be heard as she replied, "You just left, Dylan. No farewell, no explanation," she said. "You have no idea how much of an impact that had on me, how much pain that caused." The expression of regret appeared on Dylan's face as he fell. "Yes, Sharon does know. I truly apologize. I have not a single day gone by in which I have not felt regret about it. However, I was unable to make a pick. I had to vanish in order to safeguard you and to ensure the safety of everyone." Sharon sat back and took in his words as she leaned back. With a portion of her heart, she desired to believe him, to acknowledge his explanation, and to forgive him fully. On the other hand, another part of her suffered with the years of grief and questions that remained unanswered. "Since you left, I've evolved, Dylan. I've changed. The way I live my life is different now. I am able to stand on my own, despite the fact that I am responsible for the well-being of others." The tone of her voice was more forceful than she had anticipated, and she responded, "I am not the same Sharon who required saving." Dylan gave a slight nod, just a hint of a smile touching his lips. "That makes sense to me. Also, I am happy. I needed to find some sort of resolution, so I wanted to see you, for the sake of both of us. She was in the middle of processing this talk when both of them were startled by the sound of the door chime, which was a familiar sound. Sharon turned her head to look up and saw Nick Newman, her ex-husband and a lifelong friend, standing in the doorway. His expression was a mix of astonishment and protectiveness. "Is that you, Dylan?" In a tone that was tinged with mistrust, Nick inquired. Immediately as Dylan stood up and met Nick's eyes, the long-standing tension that had existed between them resurfaced. Sharon was able to sense the charged energy that was present in the room as the two men evaluated each other. Both of them were carrying the weight of disagreements from the past and tensions that had not been resolved. In the midst of their conversation, Sharon intervened and said, "Nick, it's okay. Dylan was just stopping by," the speaker said. "We had been playing catch-up." The gaze of Nick never strayed from Dylan's. "Having a quick stopover? Dylan, you vanished without a trace, leaving behind a great number of individuals who are upset and confused, which includes Sharon in particular. And now, out of the blue, you appear before me?" Despite the fact that Dylan's jaw tightened, he managed to keep his calm. "Nick, I came back to put everything in their proper place. I'm not here to make things difficult for you." Nick's arms were crossed, and his gaze was icy sharp. "It appears that trouble is following you, Dylan. On the other hand, Sharon is deserving of stability, or someone who will remain in this place and not abandon her and leave her with nothing." Sharon was aware that she was stuck between two significant men in her life, and she felt the pressure associated with both of their gazes. This was not the reunion that she had anticipated, but it seemed like a turning moment, an opportunity for her to tackle the unresolved concerns that had been haunting her ever since Dylan had left. Both Sharon and Dylan sat back down later that evening, after Nick had left and the coffee shop had closed its doors. Both of them were feeling the weight of what had occurred because of what had occurred. Sharon had never wanted Nick and Dylan to compete against each other again, but the sight of them together had sparked something within her. It was a reminder of the life she had previously shared with both men, each of whom represented a different part of her heart. Dylan whispered to Sharon, "I apologize for bringing even more chaos into your life. I didn't mean to do that. I am aware that I wronged you, and I will always be sorry for that." Sharon inhaled deeply and held her breath as she looked at Dylan with a sentiment that was equal parts acceptance and despair. "Possibly you did it. However, it's possible that we both required some time away in order to develop into the people we are now. Dylan, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I can't go back to being the person I was before." With a touch that was both warm and familiar, Dylan reached out to take her hand. "Well, Sharon, I do comprehend. In addition, I want you to be happy no matter what occurs." It was the first time since Michael had returned that Sharon experienced a sense of calm and tranquility. This moment of closure provided her with the strength to truly embrace her future, regardless of whether or not Dylan was a part of it. She understood that she had healed in ways that she hadn't even realized she had healed. As the days went by, Dylan remained in the city, making an effort to rebuild friendships and make peace with those he had left behind. Sharon discovered that she was becoming more at ease in his presence. Nonetheless, she was aware that her heart had gone on, and that her life was now filled with new relationships and priorities. The unexpected fact that Dylan had returned served as a reminder of her own resiliency and development. She had acquired the ability to discover happiness within herself, rather than relying on the kindness of others to provide it to her. This chapter was not just about Sharon reuniting with an old love that she had lost touch with. Rather, it was about her acknowledging her own power and the life that she had constructed on her own terms. Another time, as Dylan was getting ready to leave town for the last time, he and Sharon went to the park to say their final goodbyes to one another. Despite the fact that it was inconvenient, they both understood that it was the best choice. Dylan expressed his gratitude to Sharon by saying, "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to make things right," and his tone was filled with sincerity. A smile appeared on Sharon's face, and her heart felt lighter than it had in years. "We are grateful that you have returned, Dylan. Remember to look after yourself. They gave each other one last embrace, a silent acknowledgement of the love that they had previously had and the different courses that they had started down in their lives. The moment Dylan vanished into the horizon, Sharon experienced a sense of completion, as she was aware that she had at long last put an end to that particular phase of her life. The moment Sharon arrived back at Crimson Lights, she recommenced her life with a revitalized feeling of function. The interaction she had with Dylan had brought to her mind the resilience she had acquired over the course of her life, the people she had loved, and the life she had constructed for herself. Sharon was ready to accept whatever shocks life in Genoa City had in store for her next. She was surrounded by friends, family, and her Crimson Lights family. And as Sharon took a quick look around her coffee shop, where she saw both familiar people and new beginnings, she realized that she was located precisely where she was supposed to be. Daniel Romalotti was seated in the holding cell, and he was tapping his fingers against the bench and sink with the sound of water dripping from a pipe that was located nearby. Both of these activities were taking place simultaneously. He mumbled, "Only me," with a tone that revealed a combination of amusement and displeasure in his voice. Is there anyone else who could possibly pull off the task of transforming a charity baking sale into a murder scene? As Chance Chancellor, the extraordinary detective, entered the room with his arms crossed and a bewildered smirk on his face, Daniel gazed up at him. Upon hearing the squeak of the rubber soles on the shoes, Daniel stood up and looked around. Chance, who was standing in front of the cell, cocked an eyebrow and said, "Daniel, out of all the people I thought I'd see here tonight, you weren't even on the list." Daniel was surprised to hear this. A sigh from Daniel's mouth as he sat back in his chair. "Just believe me, I was completely unprepared for this one as well." During the time that he was running his fingers through his hair, he offered a little move of his head. "What information was I supposed to be aware of regarding the fact that that person was a member of the board? I had the feeling that I was putting an end to a disagreement that had arisen out of nowhere." Because of this, Chance was unable to contain his smirk. "I do not believe that board members are the kind of people that take pleasure in being hugged in public, Daniel. In general, I do not believe that they are. That is not even taking into consideration the fact that they are trying to create a positive impression on other people at a charity event." Putting his hands in the air, Daniel elevated them. It was a matter of self-defense. His expression was one of rage. It was a brief pause on his part. "Granted, perhaps because I had already knocked his expensive champagne out of his hand by that point," she replied in response. Although Chance posed himself as a serious detective, his chuckle was able to burst through the facade he created. Consternation caused him to shake his head while he was leaning on the bars. "All right, allow me to make things clear to you. When you saw a man arguing with the person in charge of the event, you had the idea that they were prepared to engage in a violent altercation. The first thing that sprang to your mind was, are there any wrestling maneuvers that you have at your disposal?" Daniel clarified. For all intents and purposes, it was a bear hug, but he kept his face straight throughout the entire conversation. I wanted to bring him back to his senses, and that was my purpose. Chance rolled his eyes again, the laughter that was still dancing in his eyes continuing to dance in his eyes. "It would appear that you were successful in calming him down and convincing him to report the incident to the authorities. And here we are, right now." Daniel let out a loud sigh, and his brows concentrated in concentration as he laughed to himself. However, he continued to laugh to himself. The speaker stated, "You see, this is so ridiculous that it's almost funny." And everyone laughed. In the event that my mother becomes aware of this, his trembling was a direct result of the possibility that Phyllis may respond, and he eventually stopped speaking at that point. The reaction that Chance gave was, "Oh, you bet she will," and it was clear that he was having a good time with the situation. "She is expected to come in approximately 5 minutes at the very most. There is a strong possibility that she will arrive." A sigh came out of Daniel's mouth as he buried his face in his hands and whispered the word "wonderful." "And last but not least, what about you? Do you have the intention of delivering a speech to me about how to maintain the cleanliness of my nose at this very moment, or are you simply with the intention of giving me with pleasure?" Chance dropped his head and crossed his arms while a smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth. He also crossed his arms about his chest. "If I were to be completely honest, I might just go for the entertainment angle. Since I last had a good laugh, it has been quite some time since I've had one." Although they remained silent for a brief amount of time, each of them couldn't help but let out a hearty laugh at the absurdity of the circumstance. Daniel, after what seemed like an eternity, finally moved his attention upwards at Chance, and a mischievous twinkle appeared in his eye. "And so, Detective Chancellor, Is there any possibility that you could be here to give me a break?" At the same time, he spoke out with the brightest smile he could muster and inquired. Chance cocked his head to the side in an attempt to give the impression that he was considering the idea. "Let's have a look at it anyway, shall we? I could simply let you go, but then I wouldn't have anything to hold over your head the next time we run into each other, and that would be a problem. I could just let you go." A chuckle came out of Daniel's mouth. It makes sense to do so. Regarding the potential that this is just a little misunderstanding, what are your thoughts on such possibilities? Misunderstanding of the year. I've already dismissed this as a useless piece of information. There was a response from Chance. "Oh, believe me, I've already written this off. Who else, besides a member of the board, would body slam another member of the board by accident when they were attending a bake sale fundraiser?" Daniel let out a snort while in the process of shaking his head. According to what I have shared with you, the hug was intended to be a pleasurable experience. The look that appeared on Chance's face was one of pure and total delight for the entire experience. "A friendly hug, that's fine," he replied. "This is something that you ought to convey to the unlucky person who wrecked his beautiful shoes by dropping a bottle of champagne that cost $300. I am going to tell you the truth, Daniel. I believe that this is one of the most important occurrences that has ever taken place in the history of Geno City. How wonderful! It has been established beyond a reasonable doubt that I am the sole individual who was responsible for destroying a charity event." Daniel responded, "Perfect," in a hushed voice, despite the fact that he couldn't help but show signs of giggling. "There is a possibility that I might consider framing the police report as a keepsake if I were to do just that." Chance gave a grin to the sky. "In the event that you promise to sign it on my behalf, only under that condition. Putting it up on the wall in my office is not out of the question. In order to bring to your attention the most ridiculous arrest that I have encountered over the entire year, I would like to remind you of it today." As they became more comfortable with the circumstances, they laughed together, and the tension that had been building up between them started to evaporate. The relaxed manner in which Chance carried himself was one of the factors that contributed to Daniel's improved state of mind. For all intents and purposes, it appeared as though he was not only the individual who was being detained in a holding cell, but rather a friend who had committed a mistake that was both terrible and hilarious. Then, just as they were having a moment to catch their breath, the door to the station opened, and Phyllis Summers, who was furious over everything, stormed in. She was furious about everything. At first, her attention was drawn to Daniel, but as she continued to watch Chance, it became more focused. "In your favor." It was then that she screamed out, "You had better tell me you're joking." She did this while placing her hands on her hips. "My son is going to be arrested. Are you serious about it?" In the event that two snobbish executives were having a disagreement, what was the point of this intervention? David let out a wail of agony. Her mother responded, "It is not like that at all." "What do you mean by that?" While Phyllis was glaring at both of the men, she crossed her arms and made a sharp gesture. "What's going on with you, Daniel? How are things with you? Would you kindly go over it with me?" Chance cleared his throat and put on his most professional appearance, despite the fact that his eyes were still sparkling with a sense of fun. "At the fundraiser, there was a minor incident that took place here. Phyllis, would you please take note? Also, it is possible that your kid has, gone a little bit beyond the boundaries of his power. This is something that is quite feasible." A huff was let out by Phyllis as she continued to roll her eyes. "Oh, if you can, thank you." Under the circumstances, Daniel was merely behaving in a manner that any other individual would do in the same situation. A person who is protecting another person from the possibility of a confrontation. There was a slight raise of one of Chance's eyebrows. "To clarify, Phyllis, the possible altercation that you described was actually a somewhat heated discussion about the hors d'oeuvres that were being served." In point of fact, Daniel arrived to the realization that it would be beneficial to intervene in this situation. Putting his hands in the air, Daniel elevated them. "I was under the assumption that things were going to progress in a negative direction. To add insult to injury, I put a stop to it before it got out of hand, didn't I?" A sigh from Phyllis's mouth as she smiled and shook her head in response to the situation. "I'll just leave it to my son to make hors d'oeuvres into a sport that involves fighting." As soon as Chance caught a glance of both of them, he couldn't help but break out in a smiling expression. "It's all in good humor, Phyllis. Everything that's going on is being done. There was no harm that was caused. In light of this circumstance, I feel Daniel has acquired the necessary knowledge." Following a brief period of seeming calm, Phyllis let out a long, deep breath. "Oh, that's okay. Nevertheless, the next time, she continued, directing her eyes to Daniel with a pointed expression, maybe you should simply keep your hands to yourself. A chuckle came out of Daniel's mouth. As was already agreed, in the event that there is something that has to be saved, my sole plan is to continue to play the part of the hero. The expression on Chance's face changed to one of sneering as he unlocked the door to the cell and beckoned for Daniel to leave the cell. All well, then you are free to leave. However, keep in mind, he said with a smirk, the next time I see you here, it had better be because you're bringing me a coffee, and not because you're the headline of some absurd situation. He emphasized the importance of this point. As they made their way toward the exit, Daniel smiled broadly and gave Chance a friendly bump on the shoulder. He then continued on their way. Detective Chancellor believes that you have it in your possession. Also, I just wanted to express my gratitude for the fact that you have made this situation a little less awkward. Chance gave out a shrug while wearing a grin on his face. To Daniel, whenever he needs it, I would appreciate it if you would leave me out of the excursion the next time you go on an adventure. As the two of them went out together, Daniel couldn't help but giggle, and Phyllis was shaking her head in astonishment at the ridiculousness of the entire evening. Putting it another way, Genoa City has the capacity to change an average evening into something that is utterly unexpected and, fortunately, an experience that will be remembered for a lifetime. Victoria Newman has continually demonstrated an incredible capacity for resilience throughout the course of her life, particularly in the context of her connections with her brothers, Adam and Billy. T's ties have been particularly significant. The flip side of the coin is that she reaches her breaking point as a result of a series of recent events that force her to doubt both her devotion to Newman Enterprises and her loyalty to her family. This is the other side of the coin, establishing a potential conflict of interest. When the novel first starts, Victoria's efforts to fulfill her lofty goals for Newman Enterprises are completely derailed by the activities of both Adam and Billy. This is the beginning of the book. In order to elevate his reputation within the corporation, Adam has lately devised a strategy that entails engaging in hazardous investments and exerting influence over those who are in positions of authority inside the company. During this time period, Billy has been making use of the media platform that he possesses at Chancellor Winters in order to publish pieces that are critical of Newman and have a negative impact on his reputation in the eyes of the general public. The efforts that Victoria makes to mediate between them simply serve to widen the gap that already exists between them, which then leads to an increase in the amount of unhappiness that she is experiencing. A betrayal that occurred most recently committed by him is the after realizing that there is a power vacuum within the business. Adam seizes the opportunity to obtain influence in order to further his own career. He does this in order to accomplish his goals. As a result of his collaboration with a business acquaintance of a rival company, he is able to bring about the gradual undermining of an acquisition of Newman. In the aftermath of Victoria's discovery of the double deal, she resorts to a furious dispute with Adam, accusing him of prioritizing his own ego over the well-being of the family when it comes to making decisions when it comes to the family's welfare. In the case that Adam gets to the point where he realizes that he is right, he will redirect the attention of the argument back to Victoria and claim that she is imposing restrictions on him. It dawns on her that he will always find a way to exert some form of control over the decisions that she makes, and she comes to terms with this fact eventually. Unwavering success for Billy's cause. No matter what, Billy has been conducting an investigation into Newman's financial status in order to unearth what he considers to be unethical business operations. The investigation into Newman's financial situation has been ongoing. During the time that this is going on, this investigation is being carried out. Victoria confronts him because the articles he was producing were causing substantial damage to the reputation of the corporation the company was working for. The fact that she had previously supported his aspirations in the past was brought to his attention by her communication. Billy delivers a response that is both righteous and angry, and he exploits the miserable past of the people as a source of fire for his crusade. He uses the people's poor history as a source of motivation. This is something that Victoria feels to be a betrayal on a number of different levels, including both professionally and personally. The fact that this has taken place is something that she considers to be a kind of disrespect, just on the cusp of reaching the breaking point. Victoria's anxiety reaches a point where she is unable to tolerate it any longer after yet another furious disagreement with Adam. She is unable to handle it any longer. It is beyond her capacity to continue to put up with it. She begins to develop a hostile attitude toward the people in her immediate environment, particularly Nick and Nikki, as a consequence of her inability to ensure that her personal and professional lives are in a state of healthy harmony. She disregards his advice because she is aware that he consistently emphasizes the importance of family loyalty above anything else, which is advice that has lost its attractiveness. Victor provides his advice to her when he realizes that she is becoming increasingly dissatisfied, but she chooses to reject it. A friend who came along who was not anticipated. Victoria is able to find a supporter in Sharon, which is a turn of events that comes as a surprise to everyone. Within the context of their time spent together over coffee, Sharon provides her with assistance in acquiring a deeper comprehension of the current circumstance. In addition, she advises her to make her own mental well-being a top priority and to put some distance between herself and the harmful cycles that she is going through with Adam and Billy. Victoria is struck by the guidance that Sharon provides, and as a result, she starts to contemplate adopting a different strategy in response to the circumstance. She fantasizes about a version of her life in which she does not need to mediate disagreements amongst her siblings on a regular basis. This is something that she would want to happen, putting up a fight that gets off to a powerful finish. It is the encounter that takes place in Victoria's office that acts as the denouement to the story. Victoria is the one who has gathered Adam and Billy together at that location. Following that, she makes a statement that none of them could have ever anticipated, and from that point on, she firmly establishes her position. Her criteria are as follows. Either they can work together to repair the damage that they have caused, or she will walk away and leave them to deal with the consequences of their actions. She has established the conditions as follows. In her terms, she has stated them. Both of them are taken aback by the realization that Victoria's patience has its limitations, which is something that they have never experienced before and which comes as a full surprise to them. The consequences, in addition to the things that will take place after that. Due to the fact that Victoria has set an ultimatum, Adam and Billy are now driven to confront the consequences that may be the result of the activities that they have made. These consequences may include the possibility of punishment. The recent acquisition of a newly discovered sense of autonomy by Victoria has made it possible for her to accomplish the development of both clarity and strength. It is possible that this will take her to a future in which she will make all of the decisions without making any compromises, or it may lead her to a path that will lead her away from Newman Enterprises entirely. Both of these outcomes are plausible. During the time that Lily was practicing the words that she had been fearing to pronounce, she was sitting in her office at Chancellor Winters with her hands tightly clasped together. She was preparing to speak. She was not only aware that Devin would arrive at any time, but she was also looking forward to receiving a routine update on the most recent endeavor that the firm had undertaken. The information that she had to share with him, on the other hand, was not normal in any sense. Her attempt to get herself ready was followed by a sharp intake of breath. Nonetheless, nothing made the delivery of the news feel any less difficult than it already was. Her line of reasoning was completely disrupted by Devin's voice. In response, he cried out, "Hey, Lily," as he walked in with the same relaxed smile that he always wore. "What exactly is going on presently? My expectation was that today would be a day on which we would be able to celebrate something." Despite the fact that she could feel her pulse beating rapidly, Lily was able to summon up a smile that was only slightly hesitant. In the beginning, she made a move for Devin to take a seat and said, "There is something that we need to talk about." Devin nodded his head in agreement. The expression on his face shifted, and he became acutely aware of the stress that was visible in her face in a very short amount of time. It was with great caution that he sat down in the chair that was exactly across from her. "All right," he mumbled as he did so. "The question is, what's up?" Lily inhaled deeply once more and exhaled slowly. "After a lengthy phone conversation with the investor team, I have just ended my conversation. Do you have any prior experience with the persons on who we have been counting for the expansion into Chicago?" "Devin, it appears that they have changed their minds. As far as I can tell, they are not going to move forward with the proposed payment." The expression on Devin's face remained expressionless for a little moment as he comprehended what she had spoken. Because of the weight of the words, he was unable to verbalize his thoughts. The words hung heavy in the air. "What exactly is it?" His voice was hardly audible above a whisper when he said, "How?" His question was barely audible. As a result of this transaction, it was anticipated that it would be a sure thing. Lily's remark, "I know," revealed that her tone was strained and characterized by a combination of displeasure and disappointment. On the other hand, they attributed the problem to some unanticipated financial difficulties that happened on their end. It would imply that they do not have sufficient faith in the current state of the market to move forward at this time without more action. Devin shook his head, and the tone of his voice became progressively irate as he did so. Would it be accurate to say that they have been holding off on telling us until now? It is incredible that after all of the assurances, the never-ending meetings, and the conversations, they proceed to simply abandon us without providing any further information. A nod was given by Lily while she was expressing her own frustration. In all honesty, I engaged in a conflict with them on it. I did everything in my power to save the contract, but they made the decision that was irrevocable. Every single thing that came to my mind was done. I wish I had more positive news. A little amount of time, the only sound that could be heard in the room was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. This was the only sound that could be heard. With each downward glance, Devin's creases on his brow became more pronounced. When it came to this expansion, he had put in a considerable lot of effort, not just regarding the finances, but also with his own personal life. A source of pride for him, the idea of building a legacy alongside his sister was something that he believed would be a way to honor his father's memory. He believed that this would be another way to show respect for his father. During this particular instant, he had the feeling that he was losing control of that image. "What are we going to do now?" was the query that was asked in a hushed voice. Lily puffed herself up in a resolute manner, her eyes blazing with determination as she leaned forward. "In my opinion, it would be beneficial for us to get back together and discuss other potential options. There are additional investors that are interested in the venture, despite the fact that it will require more time and effort. In spite of this, it is not necessary for us to let it discourage us." Devin's eyebrow was raised, and there was a hint of uncertainty in his gaze when he was looking at you. "What are your thoughts on the possibility that we will be able to find another person who is willing to commit this kind of money on such short notice?" The fact that each and every one of these investors understood our objective was the major factor that led us to make the decision to work together with them. This is exactly where we began, so here we are. There was a slight abrasion caused by Lily. Despite the fact that she was able to connect with his annoyance, she also found out that she was suffering the same degree of stress that he was. "I'm not going to make any assumptions about how easy it will be, Devin. It is true that this is a setback. Nevertheless, we have encountered obstacles in the earlier stages of our journey. It is imperative that we do not permit this to cause us to fully detach ourselves from the bigger picture." While Devin was running his fingers over his face, he let out a sigh that slid down his cheeks. "In what way does the bigger picture look?" "Lily, the expansion will not take place if you do not make the investment that you have made. In addition, we are both aware of the implications that this has for the progression of Chancellor Winter's relationships. While it is possible that we will not be able to keep some of the talent that we have been bringing in, it is also possible that we will not be able to scale up in the manner that we had expected." The tone of Lily's response was cool, and she stated, "I get that," during her response. "Nevertheless, there is always a method to proceed with the situation. We are all in this together, despite the fact that I am aware of the suffering you are experiencing. We are going to arrive at a different solution." Devin's eyes narrowed slightly, and his tone grew more kind, despite the fact that it maintained its edge. While this was happening, his tone remained sharp. "With one another, to be sure. That being said, why do I have the sensation that I am hearing this information after the fact? If you were aware that it was going to fall apart sooner than you are letting on, is it conceivable that you were the one who knew it?" The inquiry caused Lily's cheeks to go rather red, and she responded by saying that she was surprised. Despite the fact that she was aware that Devin would go through a painful experience, she had not intended for it to be to the extent that it was mistrustful. As she stated, "I only found out a couple of hours ago when I found out." Her tone of voice was authoritative. "Before I came to you, I needed some time to myself so that I could compose myself and think about what had just taken place. There is no doubt in my mind that I was not attempting to conceal it from you." When Devin took a breath, the anger that had been building up left behind a touch of bitterness, despite the fact that it had somewhat subsided. "Listen, Lily, I'm at a loss for words. To put it another way, it seems as though we are constantly dealing with these issues that ought to have been avoided before they occurred. As if we are constantly involved in the same battles, it seems as though we are experiencing this." Sitting on the opposite side of the desk, Lily extended her hand and made contact with his palm. Her demeanor softened and became more relaxed. "Devin, I am right there with you in terms of my anger and dissatisfaction. Furthermore, this development was not only important to you, but it was also crucial to me. On the other hand, I have faith in us, in our organization, and in our ability to create a successful outcome for this venture. Altering our strategy, searching for new partners, or looking into different markets are all options that we have. The other side of the coin is that we cannot give up. Devin was able to feel part of his anger melt away as he gazed down at her hand that was resting on his. The familiar warmth of the familial connection made Devin feel this way. "Lily, I don't want to give up either," he said, and he was quite correct in his statement. A significant setback is the fact that we were unable to secure this contract. To put it another way, this is a significant setback. The expression in her eyes was one of seriousness, and she bowed her head. The fact that this is a setback does not mean that it is the end of the road. Despite this, we are still able to see the vision. We are still able to communicate with one another. Furthermore, if we are able to make the most of this circumstance, we will emerge victors because of it. He gave a tiny smile and nodded his head in agreement. "I'll give it to you. You've always been better at rousing the soldiers than anyone else has ever been. It's okay, I'll give it to you." She smiled as she turned her attention back to him, expressing her appreciation for the shift in his tone. The objective of having a family is to accomplish this. Despite the challenging conditions, we are there for one another and offer support and encouragement. Last but not least, Devin finally took a deep breath and looked into the eyes of his sister after what seemed like an eternity had passed. "Not a problem, Lily. I am in agreement with you. Let's have a look at some different approaches to making this happen, shall we? With respect to the heritage of both our own and that of our father." Lily felt a wave of relief rush over her after she gave his hand a light squeeze since she was feeling anxious. In order to discover the truth, the two of them would collaborate.